sun hung low over the canyon, spilling golden light across the rippling water. Dust clung to Emily Hart's skin after 5 long days of travel from Kansas. Her father's ranch lay far behind her now, a memory of fences and propriety. Out here in the heart of the Arizona frontier, there were no boundaries, no eyes to judge. Just her, the wide sky and the whisper of the river winding through Redstone. She dismounted her weary mare, leading it toward the shade of a cottonwood tree. The air smelled of juniper and dust, and the distant hum of cicadas filled the silence. Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she unbuttoned her dress. She wasn't usually the type to undress in the open, but her skin burned for the feel of clean water, so she looked around once, twice, no sign of anyone, and slipped out of her dusty clothes. The cool water embraced her like a forgotten friend. She dove under, hair streaming behind her, and for the first time in days she felt human again. The river whispered over her bare shoulders as she floated, eyes closed, letting the current carry away her exhaustion. If her father could see her now, bathing in Apache country, half wild and laughing, he'd have a fit. But Emily Hart was done being told what was proper. She didn't see the shadow that moved among the trees. Chief Koa had been watching her since dawn. His band had seen smoke rising near the canyon and sent him to scout. When he reached the river and saw the white woman step into the water, something in him stopped. Her skin glowed against the dusk, pale as river pearls, and her hair, wet, sunlit, clung to her neck like silk. He should have turned away, but curiosity anchored him. No woman had ever looked so fragile and so defiant at once. When she swam farther downstream, he approached quietly, his moccasins making no sound on the soft earth. Her clothes lay folded by the rock, a blue calico dress, a corset, underthings she would never dream of showing any man. Koa picked them up, studying the fine stitching. White woman's clothes, stiff, unnatural. He slung them over his shoulder with a small, amused grunt. If she wandered this far, she needed a lesson in caution. Emily emerged from the water moments later, refreshed and humming to herself, until she saw the empty rock. Her heart stopped. What in... She spun, scanning the trees. Who's there? No answer, just the wind rustling the leaves. Panic rose like fire in her chest. She covered herself with her arms and shouted, "Give me back my clothes." From the shadows, a deep voice answered, calm and rough as stone. "Come and get them yourself." Emily froze. That voice was no echo. Her eyes darted toward the sound, and there he stood, tall, bare-chested, his dark hair tied back, his eyes steady and unreadable. The sun carved his features in gold and shadow, the kind of face that looked carved by the land itself. An Apache. Every story she'd ever heard about them came flooding back. Raiders, killers, wild men of the desert. But this one just stood there, holding her dress like a challenge. "Give them back," she demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. He tilted his head slightly, that unreadable calm never breaking. "You are far from your people. Why?" "That's none of your business," she snapped. "I'll freeze out here." A small smile touched his lips, slow and infuriating. "Then come take them." The audacity of him sent heat crawling up her neck. She wanted to scream, to run, to slap that look off his face. But her feet wouldn't move. For reasons she couldn't explain, his voice sent a strange shiver through her. Not of fear, but something else entirely. Finally, he turned and began to walk away, the blue fabric still hanging from his shoulder. "Wait," she shouted, stepping forward into the shallows. He looked back once, his eyes dark and knowing. "Next time," he said softly, "choose a safer river." And just like that, he was gone, leaving her alone with the wind, the water, and the first stirrings of something wild inside her that she didn't yet understand. The desert dawn was pale and cold when Emily Hart finally found the Apache again. Her fury had burned through the night, fury at being made a fool of, fury that she had allowed a man, a stranger, to humiliate her so easily. Her father had always said she had a temper that would get her killed one day. Maybe today was that day. She followed the faint trail along the river, her boots heavy in the sand, her heart pounding like a drumbeat of anger. When she reached a clearing, she saw him sitting by a small fire, his dark hair gleaming in the sunrise, a calm silhouette against the wild canyon. Her blue dress hung across his shoulder like a trophy. Emily froze for a heartbeat, then straightened her back and stormed toward him. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. "Stealing a woman's clothes?" Koa looked up from his fire, his face unreadable. "You shouted loud enough for the canyon to hear," he said slowly. "I thought you wanted someone to listen," she bristled. "You could have just given them back." "I could have," he agreed, his gaze steady and unflinching. "But then you'd walk into my land again thinking it was safe. This isn't your land." She shot back. "It belongs to everyone, to God." He rose to his feet then, tall and broad-shouldered, his bare chest marked with faded paint and scars. "No," he said softly. "It belongs to the ones who bleed for it." The fire popped between them. Emily's throat tightened, but she refused to step back. "I didn't mean to trespass," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "I just needed to bathe." "You are far from the towns," he replied. "No woman rides alone here." "You are either brave or foolish." "Maybe both," she said, lifting her chin. Something flickered in his eyes. Not quite amusement, not quite respect. He tossed her clothes onto the sand at her feet. "Then wear these," he said. "Go back to your people before something worse than me finds you." Emily bent to grab them, but when she turned away, she felt his hand close around her wrist, firm but not cruel. She gasped and tried to pull free, but his grip only tightened a little. "Let me go," she hissed. He didn't. His gaze held hers, deep and dark, the color of storm clouds over the mesa. "You do not understand this place," he said quietly. "You walk as if the earth will protect you. It won't." "Then why do you care?" she asked, her voice trembling between anger and something she didn't want to name. For a long moment he said nothing. The only sound was the river nearby and the soft crackle of fire. Then finally he released her. "Because," he said, "I do not like to bury foolish hearts." Emily stood frozen, her pulse hammering in her ears. She wanted to scream, to curse him, but instead she found herself staring at the way the morning light carved his profile. Strong, proud, lonely. He turned away, kneeling to feed the fire. "Go," he said simply. She dressed quickly, the fabric clinging to her still damp skin. But before she left, she hesitated. "What's your name?" she asked, though she didn't know why. "Koa," he answered without looking up. "It means strength." "Well, Koa," she said stiffly, "you might try using some of it for manners next time." That earned her the faintest smile. "If there is a next time, little bird," he said, "you will come to me for help." Her cheeks flamed. "Don't count on it." But as she mounted her mare and turned toward the canyon trail, she couldn't shake the sound of his voice. Calm, certain, and maddeningly confident. She told herself she hated him. She told herself she'd never see him again. But deep down, Emily knew that men like Koa didn't leave a woman's thoughts easily, and that something had begun between them, something neither could control. By the time the second night fell, the Arizona desert had turned cruel. Wind lashed across the plain, carrying the bitter sting of dust. Emily Hart huddled beside her wagon, trying to light a lantern that refused to catch. Her mare, Daisy, stamped nervously at every sound, the cry of a coyote, the whisper of brush shifting in the dark. She told herself she wasn't afraid. She told herself that she was used to the wilderness by now. But that wasn't true. Koa's warning, "You walk as if the earth will protect you. It won't," echoed in her head, an unwelcome truth she was too proud to admit. She'd meant to reach Fort Bowie by dusk. But a broken wheel had stranded her in Apache territory, and now the shadows seemed alive with things she couldn't name. She drew her shawl tight and tried to calm Daisy. Then she heard them, men's voices low and rough, speaking English with the sharp edge of cruelty. Bandits. Emily's blood ran cold. She snuffed out the lantern and crouched behind a crate, peering through the cracks in her wagon. 3 of them rode in, one with a red bandana and a grin that could curdle milk. "Well, what do we got here?" he drawled. A little bird alone in the desert, her heart hammered. She reached for her father's revolver, the one she swore she'd never have to use. The men dismounted, laughing as they circled the wagon. "You lost, sweetheart?" one called. "Or just waiting for company?" When the red bandana man yanked open the back door, Emily fired. The shot went wide, the recoil nearly knocking her down. The men roared with laughter. "She's feisty," one jeered. Before she could reload, they were on her. She kicked, bit, fought, but there were too many hands, too much strength. One grabbed her arm and twisted it cruelly. "We'll have some fun first," he hissed. Then the night exploded, a flash of movement, and silent, swift, and the man's laughter cut short with a choking gasp. The others turned, startled, as an arrow sang through the dark and struck the next one in the chest. Emily fell back, eyes wide. From the shadows stepped Koa. His face was cold, carved in rage. Another arrow flew, hitting the third man before he could draw. It was over in heartbeats. For a long moment, only the wind moved. Then Koa turned to her. "I warned you," he said quietly. Emily tried to speak, but her voice broke. You followed me." His gaze softened slightly. "I heard your horse." She was frightened. "I didn't ask for your help," she whispered, trembling. "You didn't need to," he replied. "You were dying." She tried to rise, but her legs gave out. Koa knelt beside her, his hand brushing the dirt from her cheek. "You are safe now." "Don't touch me," she breathed, though her body leaned toward his warmth. He didn't argue. Instead, he gathered her gently into his arms, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. "My camp is near," he said. "You will rest," her pride flared. "I'm not your prisoner." Koa looked down at her, his eyes unreadable in the firelight of the dying embers. "No," he said. "You are my responsibility." And with that, he carried her into the dark, past the corpses of the men who'd meant to harm her, past the wreck of her wagon, past everything she thought she knew about right and wrong. The desert swallowed the sound of his footsteps, and Emily's head rested against his chest, listening to the steady drum of his heart. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to tell him to put her down, but exhaustion won. And her last thought before sleep claimed her was of his voice. Low, sure, unyielding, and how no man had ever sounded so certain of her safety. When Emily woke, the world was quiet. Too quiet. A faint smoke trail rose from a nearby fire pit, and the smell of roasted corn lingered in the air. She sat up slowly, realizing she was lying on a bed of furs inside a small brush shelter. Outside, morning light filtered through branches, painting the world in amber. For a moment, she thought it had all been a nightmare. The attack, the arrows, Koa's hands carrying her through the dark. But then she saw him. Koa sat a few yards away, crouched beside the fire. His back was to her, and he was sharpening a knife on a flat stone. The rhythmic scrape of metal sent shivers through her. He was calm, focused, the kind of calm that came from power, not peace. She cleared her throat. "You can stop pretending to be my savior now," she said. "I'm leaving." He didn't turn. "Where will you go?" "Back to the fort," she said stubbornly. "I'll find the trail." "Your trail is gone," he replied evenly. "The bandits took your horse. The soldiers will not search this far. So you're keeping me here," she snapped, "until it is safe." He looked over his shoulder then, eyes meeting hers. "Unless you wish to die proud." Emily's jaw tightened. "You think I can't survive without you?" He rose to his full height, the firelight glinting off the blade in his hand. "I know you can't," he said. There was no arrogance in his tone, just simple, maddening certainty. "Why are you like this?" she demanded. "Always acting like I'm some helpless child." Koa slid the knife into his belt and took a step closer. "Because you don't listen," he said. "You speak like thunder, but you hear nothing. Maybe because you talk in riddles." She fired back. "You never say what you mean." That stopped him. For the first time, something almost human, almost amused, flickered in his expression. "Maybe," he said slowly, "because you are not ready to understand." Emily crossed her arms, her heartbeat quickening despite her defiance. "Try me." Koa studied her for a long moment, then knelt by the fire and drew a line in the dirt with a stick. "This is my land," he said. Then he drew another line. "This is yours." Between them, danger, she frowned. "So? Everyone knows Apache lands are dangerous." He looked up at her, his dark eyes steady. "Not because of us," he said. "Because of men who take what is not theirs. Soldiers, thieves, ranchers. You walk in with your pretty clothes and your soft hands thinking the land will bow to you." Emily's throat tightened. His words stung because they were true. "I didn't mean to disrespect your people," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Then learn, learn," she repeated. He picked up a smooth stone and held it out to her. "Tusa," he said. She blinked. "What?" "Stone," he said, repeating the word. "Say it." She hesitated, then tried to mimic the sound. Tusa. He shook his head, smiling faintly. No, your tongue is lazy. Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Apache words are strong, he said. Like our hearts. Not soft, she glared at him, then repeated it again, sharper this time. Tusa, Koa's smile deepened. Better. She rolled her eyes but couldn't help a reluctant grin. Happy now, teacher? He leaned closer, voice low. Not yet. Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat the air between them changed. The desert wind hushed, the fire crackled softly, and Emily realized how close he was. She could feel the warmth of him, smell the wild sage on his skin. Then Koa looked away, breaking the spell. More words tomorrow, he said, standing. I didn't agree to lessons, she muttered. You already started? He replied without turning, and disappeared into the trees. Emily sat by the fire, heart pounding, lips still tingling from the way his gaze had lingered on hers. She had come here out of anger, stayed out of necessity, but now she wasn't sure which one was keeping her. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Emily woke with the sunrise and helped gather wood for the fire. Koa rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried weight, like stones placed carefully in her path. He taught her to ride bareback, to track animal prints in sand, to listen for danger in the wind. At first she resented it all. His orders, his silence, his maddening patience. But gradually she began to understand him in ways that had nothing to do with language. He never raised his voice, never struck her, never looked at her as something fragile. To Koa she was capable, or she would be once she stopped fighting the world. One evening, as the horizon burned orange, Koa's warriors returned from a hunt. They greeted him with quiet respect, not fear, not servitude. To them he wasn't just a leader. He was the spine of their people, and to Emily's surprise, none treated her cruelly. They nodded at her with wary curiosity but no hatred. That night the camp came alive. Drums echoed through the canyon, deep and rhythmic. Fires danced. The tribe celebrated the successful hunt, singing songs that rose like smoke into the stars. Emily stood at the edge of the light, watching the women twirl in soft leather skirts, their laughter wild and free. Koa appeared beside her, silent as ever. Why do you stand in the shadows? He asked. Because I don't belong there, she murmured. He tilted his head. You think I belong everywhere? She met his gaze. You're their chief, and you are their guest. His tone carried no mockery, just truth. Come. Before she could refuse, he took her hand. His fingers were rough, his palm warm. She tried to pull away, but he tightened his hold just enough to guide her toward the fire. The crowd fell back, smiling, whispering, Koa. She began uneasy. I don't know how. Then learn, he said, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his mouth. The drums deepened. He placed her hands against his chest and rested his on her waist. His heart beat slow and steady beneath her fingers. Follow, he said. She moved stiffly at first, awkward and uncertain, but Koa didn't laugh. His movements were sure and fluid, his eyes locked on hers, grounding her. The world blurred. Firelight, music, the scent of sage and smoke. The way his hand lingered at her back made her feel both terrified and safe. Don't think, he murmured. Feel, she did. And something inside her, something she'd buried beneath pride and fear, began to wake. Around them, the circle of dancers clapped and sang. Koa spun her gently, then drew her close again, their bodies brushing, their breath mingling. She could feel every inch of him, solid, alive, impossibly warm. Her heart raced so fast she thought he must feel it. When the song ended, the crowd cheered. Emily stepped back quickly, face flushed, eyes downcast. Koa lifted her chin with a single finger. Now, he said softly, you look like you belong. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Later, when the fire burned low and the stars spread thick across the sky, Emily sat apart from the others, hugging her knees. Koa came to her again, this time without a word. He handed her a blanket, then sat beside her in the silence. After a long pause, she whispered, You don't have to protect me anymore. I'll go tomorrow. He stared at the flames. If you wish, he said, just like that. You are free, he said. But freedom is not safety. She looked at him, at the faint scars across his arm, at the calm certainty in his eyes. And you? She asked. What are you? He turned toward her, his voice barely above a whisper. I am the one who carries the land, he said, and now you are part of it. The words lingered long after he walked away, heavy, beautiful, and terrifying. For the first time, Emily realized she wasn't sure whether she wanted to leave him at all. The morning came with the smell of dust and smoke, the kind that didn't belong to campfires. Emily awoke to the sound of distant hoofbeats and shouts echoing through the canyon. The warriors were already mounting their horses, bows in hand, their faces sharp with tension. Koa stood at the edge of the camp, his eyes scanning the horizon. Even in chaos, he looked unshakable. Emily ran to him, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. What's happening? Soldiers, he said shortly. They found our trail. Her stomach dropped. The U.S. Army? He nodded once. They will say they came for peace, but their rifles tell the truth. Before she could respond, a young warrior galloped up, shouting in Apache. Koa's jaw hardened. He turned to her, his tone calm but urgent. You must hide. No, she said. If it's the army, they'll know me. They'll protect me. He grabbed her arm, eyes flashing. They will not protect what they do not understand. You came here alone. You stayed with me. What do you think they will call you? The words cut deep. She wanted to protest, to believe her people would see her as innocent. But she had seen the way soldiers looked at Apache women, even children. To them, this land was enemy ground. Before she could answer, gunfire cracked across the canyon. Koa cursed softly and motioned her toward a rock outcropping. She hesitated, torn between the two worlds she now straddled, one of polished English words and one of earth and fire. Koa. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, fear flashed in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. Go, he said, voice low but fierce. If they see you beside me, they will shoot. She fled to the rocks, heart pounding, and crouched behind them as the soldiers appeared on horseback. The commander, and a tall man in a blue coat, clean and righteous, called out in English, Lay down your weapons. The army has claimed this land. Koa stepped forward, unarmed, his stance proud. This land was claimed long before your flags, he said evenly. The commander's voice hardened. You're harboring a white woman. Surrender her, and we'll let your people live. Emily's blood ran cold. She rose before she could stop herself, shouting, I'm here. Every rifle turned toward her. Emily! Koa barked, his tone sharp with warning, but she kept walking. Don't shoot, she cried. They didn't kidnap me. I came here by mistake. The commander's eyes narrowed. By mistake, he echoed. And you've been living with them for how long? It doesn't matter, she said, her voice breaking. They saved my life, one of the soldiers sneered. Looks like they did more than that. Laughter rippled cruelly through the ranks. Koa stepped between her and the rifles, fury flashing in his eyes. Watch your tongue, he growled. Step aside, savage, the commander ordered, or we'll put you down. The air trembled with the promise of violence. Emily moved before she could think, pressing herself between Koa and the guns. No, she shouted. If you shoot him, you'll have to shoot me too. The soldiers hesitated. For one frozen heartbeat, everything was still. Just the wind, the scent of gunpowder, and two people standing together in defiance of both nations. Finally, the commander spat in the dust. Take her. She'll hang for treason soon enough. Two men dismounted, seizing her by the arms. Koa lunged, but 3 rifles leveled at his chest stopped him cold. Emily struggled, screaming his name as they dragged her away. Koa! His voice followed her, deep and hoarse. Do not fear. I will come. The last thing she saw before they threw her onto a wagon was Koa standing tall among the smoke and sunlight, his expression carved with fury and something far more dangerous. A vow. He would not let her go. The soldiers took her east, and bound by rope, wrists raw, dust caking her face. Emily sat in the back of the wagon, watching the sun melt into the desert as the land she had learned to love disappeared behind her. The wind carried the smell of smoke and iron. Every bump of the wheels jarred her bruises. But the real pain came from the thought of Koa, still out there, surrounded, wounded, maybe worse. When they reached the fort, she was thrown into a wooden cell beside the supply yard. A guard tossed a canteen of water toward her. You're lucky, miss, he sneered. Most girls who side with savages don't live long enough for a trial. I didn't side with anyone, she whispered. But her words were lost beneath the clang of the door. Hours blurred into days. The soldiers called her the Apache's woman when they thought she couldn't hear. She learned to keep silent, just as Koa had taught her, and wait. Each night she listened to the coyotes cry beyond the fort walls and wondered if one of those shadows moving through the dark was him. Then, one night, the sentry's whistle cut short. A sound soft fast like air splitting, followed by a gurgling cry. Then silence. Emily sat up, heart pounding. The lock turned, and there he was. Koa stepped into the dim cell, his face streaked with dirt and blood, his chest rising and falling hard. He'd come alone, again. His knife gleamed faintly at his belt, but his eyes, those deep storm-dark eyes, were all she could see. "You came?" She breathed. He moved closer, his voice a rasp. "You thought I wouldn't?" She rose shakily to her feet. "They'll kill you if they find you here. They already tried." His lips twitched a faint, grim smile. "Now we go." He reached for her wrist to cut the ropes, but she caught his hand. "Wait," she said. "Koa, listen. If you kill anyone else, there'll be no peace left. They'll come for all your people." His jaw tightened. "They came for us before you ever knew my name." Her throat closed around her next words. "Then let's not give them another reason." His hand lingered over hers, rough and trembling with restraint. For a moment everything between them, pride, anger, fear, and burned away, leaving only the truth that neither could deny anymore. "You should not have come back for me," she whispered. He stepped closer, his breath brushing her cheek. "I told you I would." And before she could stop herself, she kissed him. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate, reckless, a collision of two worlds that were never meant to touch. His hand came up to cradle her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw as if memorizing her. She could taste dust and smoke and salt, but underneath it, something fierce and alive, the heartbeat of the land itself. Outside, a shout broke the moment. "She's gone." "Sound the alarm!" Koa pulled back, eyes blazing. "We run," he said. He sliced her bonds, took her hand, and they fled into the night. The fort erupted behind them, rifles cracking, torches flaring. Emily stumbled, but Koa pulled her along, his movements sure, silent, relentless. When they reached the horses tethered beyond the ridge, she turned back once. Flames licked the sky, lighting the desert an angry orange. "They'll hunt us," she said breathlessly. Koa helped her mount. "Let them try." They rode through the darkness, wind whipping through her hair. Every gunshot that echoed faded a little more behind them, until there was only the rush of air and the steady beat of hooves. When they finally stopped at dawn, miles from the fort, Emily leaned against him, too tired to speak. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, his hand brushing her hair. "They will call you a traitor," he murmured. She looked up at him, eyes soft with exhaustion and something deeper. "Then let them." "I know what I am," Koa nodded slowly. "And what is that?" Emily managed a faint smile. "Yours." He touched his forehead to hers, and in the stillness of the desert dawn, it felt like the world itself held its breath. The sun rose hot and merciless over the desert, painting the rocks in shades of copper and blood. Emily and Koa rode until their horses were trembling, their breaths coming in ragged bursts. When they finally stopped, it was near an abandoned mission, half-collapsed adobe walls, a dried-up well, and a crumbling cross that still clung stubbornly to the rooftop. Koa lifted her down gently, his arm steady though his body bore wounds that hadn't healed. "We rest here," he said, scanning the horizon with eyes that never seemed to blink. Emily nodded. Her hands shook as she poured the last of their water into a tin cup. "They won't stop looking for us." He gave a quiet grunt. "No, they won't." But there was something else in his tone, not fear, not resignation, but acceptance. The kind that only came to a man who had already lost too much. She wanted to ask what that meant, but instead she reached for the rag in her pack and began cleaning the gash along his ribs. The wound was deep, ugly, half-healed and torn open again during their escape. He didn't flinch. "Why didn't you stay hidden?" she asked softly. "Why come for me?" He looked at her, eyes dark as the night sky. "You would have done the same." "That's not an answer." His lips curved slightly. "Then maybe I don't have one that you'll understand." She wrung the rag and touched his chest again, her fingers trembling. "You could have died." "I already have," he said simply. The moment you were taken, her hand stilled. There was nothing she could say to that. They sat in silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the restless scrape of sand against the walls. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice barely audible. "What happens now?" Koa tore a strip of cloth from his shirt and began binding his wound. "We move north to the high country. My people wait there. And when the soldiers find us..." He tied the knot tight. "Then we fight." She looked at him sharply. "There's always fighting. Always blood. Isn't there any other way?" Koa's gaze drifted toward the far ridge, where heat shimmered like smoke. "There was, once, before the forts, before the fences. Before white men came with papers that said the land was no longer ours." Emily swallowed. "And now?" "Now the land takes back what it wants." He rose and crossed to the doorway, the wind tugging at his hair. "You should rest," but she didn't move. Her heart pounded too hard for that. "Koa," she said finally, "if I stay with you, there's no going back, no home, no name." He turned to her then, and in his face she saw the raw truth of it. No promise of safety, no easy ending. Only the wild, dangerous kind of love that burns everything it touches. "I won't ask you to stay," he said quietly. "But if you do, you will belong to no one. Not even me." Emily rose to her feet, dust clinging to her skirts. She crossed the space between them and pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart beneath her palm. "I stopped belonging to anyone the day you stole my clothes," she said with a faint, trembling smile. "Maybe that's when I found myself." He caught her hand, holding it there, eyes searching hers as though he needed to be certain. Outside, a hawk cried. Sharp, distant, a warning. Koa's head turned. The horizon shimmered with more than heat now. Riders. Dust rose like ghosts in the distance. "They found us," Emily whispered. Koa's grip tightened. "Then we make our stand." He helped her onto her horse, his every movement calm and deliberate, like a man walking into fate. The two of them rode out from the shadow of the mission, toward the oncoming storm of soldiers. The land stretched endless before them, and somewhere in that vast emptiness, Emily realized she no longer feared what was coming. For love, real, wild love, always demanded a price, and she was finally ready to pay it. The soldiers came at dawn, their silhouettes rising over the red horizon like iron ghosts. The thunder of hooves broke the still desert air, echoing off the canyons. Emily and Koa stood side by side on a narrow ridge above the abandoned mission, the last shelter they had left. Koa's horse snorted and pawed the ground. He adjusted his rifle with the calm of a man who'd faced death too many times to flinch from it. Emily's hands trembled, but not from fear, from the electric surge of knowing this moment would define everything that came after. "Go into the canyon," Koa said without looking at her. "Follow the dry riverbed north. You'll reach the pines by nightfall." "And leave you?" She shot back. "No." He turned to her then, eyes fierce beneath his dark brow. "You have no weapon, no armor. They'll shoot you before I can protect you." "I don't need protecting," she said, her voice breaking. "Not from you. Not anymore." For a long heartbeat, they stood locked in silence. The Apache warrior and the white settler girl who should have been enemies but had somehow found each other in a land that devoured both. Then came the crack of a rifle. The bullet struck the sand a few feet away. "Go," Koa shouted. Instead, Emily ran toward him, seizing the rifle strapped to the spare horse. She fumbled with the lever and he almost cursed, until he saw her stance, steady despite the fear twisting her stomach. "You learned," he said softly, almost in disbelief. "You taught me," she replied. The soldiers were close enough now that she could see their faces. Sweat, rage, the glint of polished buttons. A voice barked from below. "Surrender the woman. You'll die either way." Koa's voice carried like thunder down the canyon. "Then I choose how." He fired first, and a clean, deadly shot. The nearest soldier tumbled from his horse. Then the desert erupted. Gunfire tore through the air, splintering stone, filling Emily's ears with a ringing she'd never forget. Koa moved like lightning, firing, ducking, reloading with a rhythm born from years of survival. Emily knelt beside him, mimicking his motions, each shot more sure than the last. But there were too many. For every man that fell, two more appeared through the dust. The heat grew suffocating, gunpowder thick in the air. "Koa!" she shouted as another volley whistled past. "They're flanking." He turned, too late. A shot tore through his shoulder, spinning him backward. Emily screamed and dragged him behind a boulder, pressing her hands to the wound. Blood poured between her fingers. "Don't you dare leave me," she hissed, voice shaking. He coughed, forcing a pained smile. "Still in giving orders?" "Always." He gripped her wrist, his touch weak but burning. "Listen to me. If I fall, you run." She shook her head violently. "No. We end this together." The soldiers were advancing again, their commander shouting orders. Emily picked up Koa's fallen rifle, raised it, and fired. The bullet struck true, the commander crumpled. The rest hesitated, confusion rippling through their ranks. Koa managed to rise, leaning on her shoulder, his breath ragged. "They'll come again. Then we'll fight again," she said fiercely, but he was fading fast. His blood soaked into the sand and red against gold. The sight broke something in her chest. She turned her fury into focus, firing again and again until the last echo faded into silence. When it was over, the ridge was strewn with bodies and smoke. The sun climbed high, burning away the shadows. Emily knelt beside Koa, cradling his head in her lap. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they were clear, fierce and alive. "You are not meant for this land," he whispered. "Yes, I am," she said through tears. "Because you're in it," he smiled faintly. "Then maybe. We both belong, after all." The desert wind swept over them, carrying the scent of sage and gunpowder. In that terrible stillness, Emily realized what love truly meant. Not just passion, not even hope, but sacrifice. She pressed her forehead to his, the way he had once done to her, and whispered, "I'm not leaving you. Not ever." And as the sun blazed down on them, two souls bound by blood, fate, and defiance, the land fell silent, waiting to see if love could outlast war itself. The wind carried whispers through the canyons that evening, of a battle fought on a nameless ridge, where an Apache warrior and a white woman made their last stand together. Soldiers returned to the fort, but few spoke of what they saw there. Those who did said the desert itself seemed to rise against them. Dust swirling like spirits, bullets vanishing into the wind, as though the land protected its own. Days later, a scout found the ridge again. He found the bodies of the fallen soldiers first, half buried in sand. Then, beneath the shadow of a boulder, he found them. The Apache and the girl. She had died with her arms around him, his hand still clasped around hers. A faint smile rested on both their faces, as though death had only brought them peace. The scout covered them with his coat and walked away without a word. Years passed. The ridge became a place the soldiers avoided, calling it Lover's Bluff. Even the wind seemed quieter there, as if still mourning. But the Apache people remembered differently. To them, Koa and the white woman were not ghosts. They were a legend. A story of forbidden love that defied war and hatred. Around the fires, the elders spoke of how the warrior gave up his life to protect a woman who had once been his enemy, and how her spirit now guarded the land beside his. Children grew up hearing it whispered, the woman who came from the east and chose to stay when the sky turned red. 20 years later, a rider came to that same ridge, a woman in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat with a letter pressed to her heart. She was Emily's sister, grown gray and tired from years of searching. She dismounted, knelt by the stone cross someone had left there long ago, and traced the faded carvings with her fingers. 2 initials, E and K, her eyes filled with tears. She had once thought her sister foolish, bewitched by savages, ruined by love. But standing there in the vast silence of the desert, she felt something different, something sacred. She read the letter again, its ink faded but still legible. It was Emily's last, written the night before the soldiers came. "If I do not return, know that I found peace at last. Tell them I am not lost. Tell them I am free." The sister pressed the paper to her chest. "You were never lost, Em," she whispered. "You just found a home we couldn't understand." A gust of wind swept across the ridge, carrying the scent of sagebrush and rain. The woman closed her eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard laughter, light and distant, echoing through the canyon below. She smiled through her tears. "Goodbye, little sister," she murmured. Then she mounted her horse and rode away, leaving the ridge untouched, just as it had been for 20 years. That night, when the sun sank and the stars spread across the sky, 2 shadows moved along the ridge, faint, golden in the moonlight. One tall and strong, the other graceful, her hair flowing like silk. They stood together hand in hand, watching over the land that had once torn them apart and finally bound them forever. Koa turned to her, his voice carried by the wind. "You're home now," Emily smiled softly. "Only because you are here," and with that, they walked into the desert moonlight, their figures fading like morning mist, their love etched forever into the bones of the land. Generations later, travelers still tell the story when they pass through the canyons. Some swear they've seen two riders at dusk, one dark-haired, one golden, crossing the ridge as the sun burns low. They say the land still remembers them, and when the wind howls across the empty mesas, it carries their voices, the white girl who stayed, and the Apache who refused to let her go. Two hearts, one legend, and a love the desert could never bury.